The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to another hour of fun and great discussion here on the Clear Signal. As always, it's great to have you with us. Now, clearsignal.com.au, of course, is the website, and there you can find information about all of our shows, what we do here, who I am, and some of the other media work I do around. If you're curious, you can find all of that on the website. I've also added a new tab just recently for those who might have missed a show and might like to catch up. There's a tab there now with full editions. You can hop on that, download and play shows at your leisure. So that's all at clearsignal.com.au. Well, ahead this week, we're going to take another close look at the issues around our food industry. I think that's something that's top of mind for a lot of people. How do we get it from the farms to the supermarkets? What's involved in that? And how perhaps is the food industry looking at ways to make some of these processes better? And let's face it, hopefully a bit cheaper in the long run. I think we could all use a bit of a reduction in our food costs. So we're going to look at some of those issues. I'm also pretty keen to explore the topic of food waste. And I raise that because we often hear stories about vast amounts of otherwise perfectly good food being disposed of and put in landfill and places like that. And I recently read an article about a company that's actually doing some great work in this space to address this issue. So I'd really like to explore that. Now, later in this hour, we're going to be speaking also with the author of a new book, which chronicles the journeys of 10 remarkable women who've done some wonderful, and I've got to say often some unique things within Australia's aviation industry as pilots. The book is called Take Flight, and it's beautifully written by Cathy Mexted. She's a master storyteller. I've read a number of her books, and I've known her for many years. I'm really looking forward to catching up with her in the second half hour of the show today. But first up, waiting very patiently on the line for us from Sydney is the editor of Food and Drink Business magazine, Kim Berry. Hey, Kim, welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you with us, Kim. I've been producing your podcast for many, many years, and I found it really fascinating, actually, the subject of food and food production. We had Tanya Barden on recently from the Australian Food and Grocery Council, and I found that a really interesting chat about how our food, the cost of our food and various issues around that. But I thought I might have you on today to talk about expanding on a few of those items. And I thought we might start by talking about Australia's food system. There's been a bit of talk in some of your recent podcasts about food systems. So maybe you could describe to our listeners, in a country as big as Australia, what is a food system?
So a food system is just a new, more encompassing way of saying our food chain. So if you think it's everything from the very beginning, the seed that the farmer puts in the ground through the pesticides or whatever they do to control their, the pests and insects and stuff that might impact on their crop, right through to then the end product where it's getting put onto a shelf or stacked in a freezer within one of our retail outlets or one of our supermarkets. And when I say to people, it's everything in between that, I often still get a bit of a blank stare, and it's like, okay, well, it comes out of the ground from the farmer, and then it goes into a process of some sort. Whether it's fresh produce, then it might just be processed in terms of going into into a crate, but it may be like a grain or a legume or something that then gets processed through something else, and then it goes from that point, and then so on and so forth, and then people start to get a bit of a aha moment of realizing that when you're putting something from a shelf into your trolley and going, oh, I can't believe that's, $5 or whatever it is, $6, $15.
Yeah.
When you think about that whole process before it, it's then been gone to a food manufacturer and it's been turned into a product, and they've had to add other ingredients to it, and there's a whole lot of equipment, processing equipment, and there's often a lot of automation in that process in terms of machinery and robotics that mean that you have less people on the ground and then, through to then the packaging and who's making the packaging and what's the packaging being made from. And people go, oh.
There's so much to it.
There's so much to it. And so when you're buying your tin of tin tomatoes, it's not like a two-step process, because once it's gone through those 50 steps, it's then actually got to get from where it's been manufactured to the supermarket. And often that's a really eye-opening process.
I suppose when we're talking about, I mean, the cost of living is on everybody's mind these days, but I suppose the big issue here in Australia is the tyranny of distance. Obviously, there's crops that are grown in certain parts of the country that everybody wants but can't be grown everywhere. So now the problem becomes, how do we get it from, you know, where it's grown to where it's processed to the supermarket shelf? And I think specifically, Kim, of somewhere like Western Australia, where that's a really extended logistics trail to get stuff over there.
Well, exactly. It's extended logistics. And of course, with extended logistics comes extended cost. And that's not just finance. That's not just financial. That's the cost of carbon footprint and time. And, you know, if you look at something like, even if we come back to the East Coast, if you look at a major tourist centre of somewhere like Cairns up on the far north coast of Queensland, and they, you know, obviously in their climate can produce lots of beautiful fresh fruit and food, but maybe they can't meet their requirement for, say, mangoes. So they're going to buy mangoes from Northern Territory, which is a very major, massive, you know, source for the rest of the country as well. Well, think about where Cairns is up on far north Queensland. Think where Darwin is. I mean, you know, I'm a bit geographically inept, but they're kind of in line with each other, or at least geographically closer to each other than, say, you know, I don't know, Cairns to Darwin to Sydney. Yeah. But those mangoes go from Darwin to Adelaide to Melbourne to Sydney to Brisbane and then to Cairns. Wow. And I think that takes something like 2.5 weeks.
And that's massively inefficient too.
Just incredible. And you also need to think somewhere like Darwin, which will have lots of beautiful fresh produce because of its climate. They don't have any form of secondary food manufacturing. So they don't only have any factories like a Nestle or a Woolworths or a small or medium-sized contract manufacturer up there that's canning food or that's made. So when they might get cut off, or any of those remote regional areas in, you know, Western Australia or Northern Territory or even parts of Queensland, and they get cut off during the wet season, or the cost of getting food into those communities is immense.
Obviously, you described that route, and of course, I know a thing or two, Kim, about rail, and I would assume it's because they're all being packed into big frozen shipping containers and put on the central rail corridor that runs right down the middle of the country. I know they are building an inland rail corridor up the east coast at the moment. I wonder if that might help it. Although getting stuff from Darwin, I still don't think it's going to be helped by that.
Well, this is the thing, and you know, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that we had those massive floods that cut off the rail link between Adelaide and Western Australia and Western Australian Perth. And, you know, that presented a really major issue in terms of food supply, and not just to Perth, but other regions over there as well. And it was actually, I understand, one of the first times, and this brings us back to this concept of a food system rather than a food chain, where the federal government, the state governments, health departments, the whole caper came together to find a solution. And also around that table, they put the food insecurity, food relief agencies, like so Food Bank and OzHarvest and One Bite, Second Bite. And it'd be better if they were Second Bite. So, yeah.
I guess.
But they actually had those agencies around the table. And of course that meant, and Brianna Casey, who's the CEO of Food Bank, has told me this, was that around that table when they were looking at solutions, they were actually able to go, well, hang on a minute, if that's going to be your solution, you're going to be cutting out a third of the population who's going to be able to afford that or going to be able to access that. And other, you know, incredibly educated and experienced people around that table were like, oh, we hadn't thought of that. And that's the crux of looking at something like a food system rather than a food chain, because it's acknowledging that every single part of that chain, every single process involved in getting that food from the farmer or wherever it's come from to us, they're all interrelated. And when you think of that in terms of, you know, our food system, it's not just a matter of semantics. It's not just changing, you know, how we call it. It is actually a complete reset as to how we view and operate our food system.
So would that be a case of perhaps pre-manufacturing particular items that are involved in any food manufacturing process, be it packaging, be it storage of the food itself, and having that in local storage? Or how does that work in terms of a contingency? Is that what they're talking about?
Yeah, well, this is like, the $1 million question, isn't it? Because we're looking, particularly here, we're looking at a country that is incredibly vast and does not have a very big population. And we already have a number of other factors in terms of, well, we pay people more than, we pay them a living wage, or ideally. And so our labour tends to be more expensive than other countries that have far bigger populations and could afford to pay their workers more.
Yeah.
But there's myriad of issues then that come into play. But let's revisit Darwin. At the moment, Charles Darwin University is running a pilot program to build an automated food production manufacturing line because of what we were talking about earlier about them not having any food manufacturing of their own. But they're looking at using particular types of packaging, which mean that the food can, like foods that would otherwise have to be refrigerated or frozen, can be kept at ambient room temperature. And so the flow-on effect of that is it's cheap to store, so you're already taking out the need for a chilled supply chain, and you're actually able then to provide communities that are, say, cut off because of weather events or because of their remoteness with food that is highly nutritious and affordable. Now, at the moment, my understanding is a lot of these really remote communities are living off things like Spam and like other tinned products that are incredibly high in salt and maybe really high in fat, that are not providing them with a proper nutritious diet and are not great for them in terms of their overall health over a long period of time. So if you think you can suddenly give them pieces of fish or meat that they can sort of store in a way that will mean they can access it longer term, that's one part of it. You're actually going to have to build systems in areas to make a more integrated food system. But the challenge, of course, for us is distance and trying to make that sustainable.
I suppose this dovetails too, Kim, into another issue that we find in the supermarkets too, which is locally produced foodstuffs versus imported food. For example, we like to eat a lot of pineapple here, but everybody says we want to buy locally produced stuff. But if you go to the supermarket shelves, quite often you find that your pineapple or, well, really any fruit or any foodstuff, there's a wide variety of it, and not a lot of it, it seems, is locally grown. So that must be an issue as well. Absolutely.
And I've spoken to the chair of SPC, Hassan Rafai, who's told me about their absolute frustration that SPC makes tinned fruits, and they're tinning fruit that comes from farmers in the valley where they're essentially based. And yet then there's, they're in Shepparton and there's a military base down the road that's importing, small tinned fruits, those individual size serves of tinned fruit, and they're importing it. They could go down the road and put a few pallets on the back of
that's crazy,
and they'd be all right.
Yeah, that's crazy. So we're talking about the Puckapunyal Army base. That's just up the road.
Yeah. And this is a huge, if the government's not going to invest and spend that extra, 5 cents per unit or whatever it is on buying Australian food for Australian soldiers, then, it's pretty hard to get cranky at the general consumer.
You see, you hear a lot of politicians talk about Buy Australian, but you talk about examples like this. You've been in this journalism game with food a long time, Kim. Do you think politicians, do they really get it? Do they get it?
No. Some do. So, because they obviously, and they're also obviously representing, say, regional communities where you have a, real agricultural background, those politicians sort of get it. But in terms of recognizing it for its importance, to give it more than just that sort of national, rah-rah, and actually money where their mouth is to ensure we have secure food systems, to ensure our entire population can access nutritious food on a daily basis. It's just not there. So if you look at when they've, the most recent has been the Future Made in Australia. Now, the current government launched that, and they'd already launched before that the National Reconstruction Fund. And at least within the National Reconstruction Fund, food kind of got a mention. But, you look at their 5 key areas for Future Made in Australia, and not one of them's food. And not one of them's even about food production. So one of them, they're not even dealing with agriculture. And it's incredibly frustrating.
The Clear Signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal. My very special guest this week is the editor of Food and Drink Business magazine, Kim Berry. You know, Kim, way back in the 1980s, I used to work at a rather large, shall we say, commercial, let's just say they had golden arches. I used to work at a place there that produced lots of food that's still very popular these days. But one thing that struck me back then, and I should hasten to add, I don't think they do it this way now, but back then we had to make product and it had a 10-minute shelf life in the production bin, and then it had to get thrown out. The amount of food waste was epic. I don't think they do it that way these days, but back then, food waste as a topic, we must throw out and waste a lot of food in this country.
Look, it's quite breathtaking, to be perfectly honest. Let's look at just us, so a consumer within their household. We waste about 2.5 times more food than we think we do.
Wow.
So Australian households throw out about 2.5 million tonnes of food a year. The country as a whole throws out just over 7. Now, that 2.5 million in a year, that equals about 7.7 million meals every day.
Good Lord.
So that's just consumers.
Oh, wow.
And End Food Waste Australia it started out its life as what was called the Fight Food Waste CRC, and CRCs within Australia, cooperative research centres, they do a lot to really, I guess, accelerate research and pilot projects and developments, say, within universities, and commercialise it, right? So the work that they've done since they began is really quite remarkable. Everything has been done with a mindset of you can't fix it if you can't see it, prove it.
Got to be able to identify the problem first. Yeah.
Exactly. They've actually just recently launched their consumer behavioural change campaign. So think life, for those of us who are a bit older, life be in it, or something like slip, slop, slap.
Yep.
And it's called The Great Unwaste. And it's basically about providing us all with strategies and tips and awareness about food waste and how to reduce it. And I think one of the really interesting things that comes out of it, because I don't know about you, Steve, but I love a statistic. I love a fact, like I just said to you before, 7.7 million, meals a day.
Yes. I think 37.8% of Australians love a good statistic.
I see what you did there.
I've got 1 million of them, I tell you.
But but apparently to a lot of people, they're really off-putting. They're really too overwhelming, and they make people then disconnect from whatever else you say. And the campaign director of The Great Unwaste, Mandy Hall, was talking about the immense amount of research that they did. So 3.5 years, they did research into consumer household behaviour with food waste. They went into houses and they followed people around. And she was saying that, blame, shame and burden are the enemy of behaviour change.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, right. And so this was the thing, and we all want to do the right thing. And so it's really built on that. And if you think that they're really playing a long game with this. Like it's just launched, but it will build and it will grow and expand and mature. And so that's sort of really exciting. And then on a corporate level, there's all manner of programs that are happening and trials and systems. And I have to say, most of business is on board with it because no business wants to waste money.
Well, that's true. And, I think you can sometimes lean on industry to lead the community in a certain way when you're talking about things like this. I noticed an interesting case study in Food and Drink Business magazine recently was that of Yumi Foods and their determination to sort of lead in this space.
Yeah, look, Yumi is it's a real trailblazer. So Katie Barfield had actually been the head of one of the food relief agencies, and she then was like, we need to work out a way to change the behaviour at the source rather than end up with all of this product some of it that we can use, like in a food relief agency, but a lot of it that's going to waste. So she's basically developed a tech platform that can go into food manufacturing companies and they enter their excess stock into this system, and then other companies who are also on the platform can see what's there. And it can be like, let's say a very major food company has overproduced, or they've produced one of their products, for argument's sake, let's say cream cheese, but the labelling process is off centre, or it's done something, it's not correct.
Yeah.
So they can't sell it. Now, you can end up with, I don't know, tons, hundreds, thousands of tons of this product that they can't sell. In the past, that'd just go to landfill. So now that goes onto the Yumi platform.
That is staggering.
Yeah, right. And then so now that goes onto the Yumi platform, and another company, maybe a much smaller company that makes cheesecakes or something, and it's just like, oh my God, like I can get this absolute top quality fresh cream cheese for like a nano cent of the price.
That just seems such a simple concept, and yet that would be an amazing inventory of surplus food that other companies could use. That's amazing.
Look, but to get companies to even understand it and to then implement it has been a long, hard slog. And again, you know how you were just saying you need that sort of, you need those larger companies to kind of set the standard. So companies like Mars Food, or Snack Brands, which is, people go, who's Snack Brands? They make nearly most of the chips and snack foods that we all love.
They provide a wonderful community service.
They do. God bless them.
Unless you're my cardiologist that's listening.
No dietitian ever. Kellogg's, Unilever, all of these companies were really early adopters of it. And look, if they hadn't have been, it would have been very challenging for them to get it off the ground. Because one of the things that Yumi has discovered in the process was that even at some of the largest, most sophisticated of our food manufacturing companies, none of them had a process in place for dealing with this excess stock, and that it was very haphazard. And it was one of those jobs that kind of was like, did you draw the short straw? Because it would go to someone, it wouldn't even be their main job. And yet the process of trying to get rid of it would then involve literally ringing other companies and other people and saying, do you want it? And then trying to liaise on how to get it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a business opportunity in itself. I don't know. That's just the simplicity of that. Yet the potential effectiveness of that seems to me just to be to use the expression I usually don't like, but I'll use it here. It's a no-brainer. It is.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And a lot of this stuff is a no-brainer. And then when you go, okay, I'm going to fix it, like Katie did, then you suddenly go, oh my God, it requires a lot of brain. But Yumi has managed to really start to transform, and I would say transform, what was a piecemeal solution that was incredibly labour intensive and really not particularly efficient into something that is saving thousands of tons of food from waste. And I think they just recently, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but I do know that they recently clocked over a particular amount of food that they've saved. I want to say like 10 million tons, but
wow.
But it's a lot. And the companies that are using it have said that since they've put it in place, there's been a 68% less manual increase in dealing with it, and they've sold 28% more volume of product than they otherwise would have.
Well, Kim, I tell you what, I think we've only just scratched the surface of my topics list here that I wanted to cover with you. Unfortunately, time is against us. If people want to find out more about that particular topic, they can get onto your favourite podcast platform and download episode 72 of the Food and Drink Business Podcast, the excellently produced, I might say, Food and Drink Business Podcast.
Listen, these dulcet tones don't produce themselves, Steve.
That's exactly right. Kim, we can find you at foodanddrinkbusiness.com.au. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you can come and join us again sometime in the future.
Oh, I'd love to.
You're listening to The Clear Signal. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking all things Australian women pilots. Some fantastic stories there with my good friend and author, Kathy Mexted.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
Welcome back to the show, folks. You know, I know I talk about aviation a lot, and well, frankly, because in my journalistic background, my journey through journalism, I guess, my path through journalism has been through aviation, which is really great because my next guest is somebody who I've known for many years, and we quite unsurprisingly met at an air show. Kathy Mexted is a journalist, a writer, an author, and also a photographer, and she's also the author of a new book that's just come out from the University of New South Wales Press, called Take Flight, The Incredible Stories of Australian Women Who Reach for the Sky. And we're going to have a bit of a chat about that today. Hi, Kathy Mexted.
Hi, Steve Visscher. Long time no see.
Yes, it's great. Now, we've done many podcast recordings before, so we should be able to get this right this time, I hope.
Someone said once, oh, no, it's Kathy Mexted. We're going to have a lot of bloopers this time.
that might have been me. Hey, Kathy, you went to a recent book launch of yours at the Royal Victorian Aero Club down here in Melbourne at Moorabbin Airport, and lots of people around, lots of copies of the book selling, which was really good. And I've had a chance to read through the book. It's great. Congratulations.
Thanks, Steve. You must have been speed reading, were you? It's only been 3 days.
Yeah, well, I can.
Just start at the front.
When I'm motivated, I can read through it. So tell us a bit about this book and how it came about.
It came about after I wrote the first book, which was called Australian Women Pilots. And a lot of people would say, what about helicopters and what about gliders and what about balloons? And so the other areas of aviation seemed to be feeling a bit neglected. And the only response I could come up with was, oh, you're in the next book. So
no pressure.
Once all the hoo-ha died down after the first book, I was sitting on the couch one day with my laptop on my knee, wondering what to do with myself next. And I thought, I know, I'll write the other book.
You've written many, many books. You have quite a long family history in aviation. Of course, you're a pilot yourself. You've got a daughter and a son who are pilots. Your husband's an airline pilot. So, and I think your father was a pilot too. So I guess before we talk about the book, that all sort of ties in together.
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town called Finley up in the Riverina in New South Wales, southern New South Wales. And my dad was part of the Finley Flying Group, and he had shares in a Piper Archer. And so that was where flying first started for me. And also the ag pilots when I was in about year 11. So one of them took me up for a fly in a little Pawnee. And so I thought that was a huge amount of fun. And Dad had suggested that I could learn to fly if I wanted to, which had never entered my head before. I didn't know that women were allowed to do that sort of thing, except we did have a librarian, Mrs. Edwards, and she had a pilot's license. But she was quite a formidable woman, and I didn't know whether that was normal. I didn't know whether it was something I could aspire to. But I came back to it later in my 20s. I learned to fly, and my daughter's just getting her commercial license at the moment, and she's the 11th person between the two families to go flying.
And of course, prior to you even getting in an aircraft, I've seen videos of you attempting to Birdman rally yourself off of garage roofs. But I suppose back in the 70s and the 60s, we all did stuff like that back in those more carefree times.
We were a bit short for entertainment up in Finley in the 70s. Well, we're a very sporting family because I'm the fifth of 8 kids, and we had neighbourhood kids as well. And we were usually playing cricket and footy in the backyard. So because I was there's only 2 girls and 6 boys, and most of the neighbours were boys as well. And so we did that. And I remember clearly this day when my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, suggested that why don't we try and jump off the roof like Superman? And so we all thought we'd give that a go. And he was saying to me, as only your brother can, from the back lawn, come on, you'll be fine. You'll love it. It's easy. It doesn't hurt. It's easy.
No,
I did it.
Nobody will know. Yeah.
Nobody will ever know. Yeah. So we started jumping off the back veranda onto the lawn. And then Mum came out and said, what, oh, my God, you kids, what are you doing? Get off the roof. And so we said, yes, Mum. And then she went back inside to keep cooking dinner, and we went back on the roof. And then the footage that you saw was taken out at our farm out at Blighty between Finley and Deniliquin. And that involved me on the ground, my sister on the shearing shed roof, and one of the neighbours' kids. And it was filmed on the home movie, what did you call those little Super 8?
Oh, like a Super 8, yeah.
Yeah, on the Super 8 by the brother who had been encouraging us in the first place. So, and I noticed when I went through that footage that my sister jumped off the roof a couple of times because it was taken from different angles. So he was quite creative with his videography.
He's the Instagram influencer of his time.
Yeah.
Now, there's many, many unique people in this book. The interesting thing, I suppose, before you even start into that, you talked about not many women flying, and I suppose the whole time I've been in aviation journalism, it's been a theme. There seems to be a push for very good reasons to get more and more females interested in flying and interested in aviation in general. I suppose, is that a motivation for writing books like this, is to present role models to people?
That's certainly what happened with the first book. I was amazed actually at how many women loved it, contacted me and just said how much they loved it. Some of the guys did too when they realised it was just a book of good stories rather than a boys versus girls type thing. It was just 10 great stories, but they all happened to be women doing it. So that's very satisfying.
Now, we see people in this book that are doing, you talked about them not doing fixed wing, although there is one fixed wing pilot, that's Emma MacDonald. I'd love to talk about her in a minute because she is doing some amazing things. But there are people here that do interesting things. I was going to say silly, but I won't. But people like jumping out of perfectly serviceable aircraft or jumping off the side of cliffs. There's some people that have found some very interesting ways to partake of aviation.
Yeah, well, when I was making the list, because you've got to start with a list, I had a helicopter, balloon and glider, and then I thought, well, that's only 3 and I need 10. And I came up with skydiving, and then I had to ask around and find out who else is around and what do they do. So I discovered quite a range. So there's a paramotor, a wingsuit base jumper, wing walker, Moomba bird woman, paraglider, aerobatics, speed skydiving, not just ordinary skydiving, Steve, because skydiving's just not fast enough for some people.
Okay, well, we're going to have to flesh that one out.
And an astrophysicist, because I think flying, it's all connected to the sky.
Yeah, I read in a very wise book once that it's the art of throwing yourself at the ground and missing. But let's have a talk about speed skydiving. What an interesting story that must have been.
I can't remember how I came across Jessica. I don't know if it was on Google or if somebody recommended her. But Jessica Johnson was at one time the Australian speed skydiving champion. And I sat down to talk to her about her life, and it starts with quite an active childhood, a fair bit of sadness in her teenage years, some confusion and difficulty in her early 20s. And then one day she went skydiving. Somebody said, when you go to Cairns, the thing to do is go skydiving. And I wrote in the book, I actually lived in Cairns for 3 years and I found heaps of things to do that didn't involve skydiving. Anyway, she went skydiving. She sat down and spoke to the guy who owned the skydiving school, and he was very kind and very matter-of-fact about the whole thing. And he said, look, there's absolutely no reason why you can't do it. And so she put her trust in that and went tandem skydiving. She loved it. She went the next day, and then she came back a few months later to Toogoolwa near Brisbane and did her skydiving course. But it didn't come easy. as it wouldn't. It shouldn't. Skydiving should never be easy.
I think of a line out of Heartbreak Ridge from 1986 where Clint Eastwood says, jumping out of a perfectly serviceable aircraft is not a natural act, so let's do it right and enjoy the view. I don't know. I think the hardest thing to do would be to find the courage just to take that step. I mean, once you're committed, obviously, but taking that step to get out would be, for the uninitiated, sheer terror. Well, it would be for me.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm actually a pilot.
When I was learning to fly, I remember a few times being up around 6,000 feet. And I remember looking out thinking, if I was going to skydive, I'd have to step out about now. And the thought of it has never really appealed. There was a moment, just a very brief moment, when I was writing Jessica's story, and I thought, I wonder if I could. And then I came to I had a good strong cup of tea and got on with what I was doing.
Yeah.
But Jess and I didn't actually talk about her first skydive. We talked about her 50th skydive when she spread her brother's ashes. And that was where I chose to start the story, because I felt that when you're telling a life story, you start with the heat of the story and then work your way backwards a bit.
I think that's a key thing in this book too as I read through it. It's not just a story about the aviation aspect of it. You are here telling stories about people's lives and their journeys to take them to the point of getting to doing the key thing we're talking about. Everybody has a story, which is kind of a theme to my radio show here, but this is kind of that put in print. Yeah,
I do like to get the whole story, or, more than just why did you jump out of the airplane? Because I had this theory that the more dramatic your life is, it's like a slingshot. The further back the slingshot comes until eventually it releases and you are catapulted to the degree that, what is it, Newton's law, equal and opposite force?
Something like that.
Yeah. I didn't describe Jess's first skydive. In fact, I don't know if we even talked about that, but Heather Swan, the base jumper, wingsuiter, she talked about stepping out onto the wing. I think I wrote in the book, she looked around and wondered if any of these people were normal. And you can issue any expletive you like here, because Heather was thinking all of them.
Yeah, I don't know. I watch a lot of videos of people that do that base jumping or wingsuit flying, and they fly through these canyons at such incredible speed, which would take, I think, equal measures of bravery and perhaps just a little bit of lunacy. I'm not really sure. But
I think Heather and Glenn were doing it before all that really high performance stuff came into being, but they were certainly there doing it.
Now, speaking of people, Kathy, that perhaps get up in an aircraft and don't even have a parachute on, wings are put in an aircraft for very good reasons. They're to hold the thing in the sky. I don't think they're really designed as a playground unless you happen to be someone who's done a wing walking course like Steph Walter.
Yeah.
I know I've interviewed a few wing walkers from other wing walking teams over my time, but boy, I don't know that I could do that either.
Were you talking about the Breitling wing walkers?
Yes, the Breitling wing walkers. So for people who don't know, there are teams that go around and do this, and they go around to air shows and they do all sorts of fancy displays. But I think one of the stories here was not only that somebody from Australia decided to go and do it, but there's actually not that many places you can go to learn to do it.
Well, there's even less now because they've closed down the place where she went to do it shortly after. But some wing walkers start off strapped to the top wing, and the airplane takes off with the wing walker standing on the wing, and then do the performance, and then land, and they're still strapped to the wing. But what Steph did was they went up to 6,000 feet, and she couldn't even talk to the pilot because he was in the back and it was open cockpit, and she didn't have a headset on, and he just waggled the wings and let her know that it was time for her to get out. And she had to climb. She undid the seatbelt, sort of, hip and shoulder and knees, and it was a bit like caving. I thought, the way you crawl through a cave. She crawled up to the top of the wing and strapped herself in, and she's just held on by one wire. The wire was wrapped around her waist and then clipped onto something. And she said, I meant to ask what would happen if I fell, but I thought I'd leave it till right at the end. And she said when it got to the end of the 6-hour training, she forgot to ask. And she said, next thing I'm up there doing this thing. So the guy waggles the wings and she climbs out, straps herself into the bar on top of the wing with a seatbelt, and then they did 2 barrel rolls, 2 loops and 2 hammerheads. And then she had to climb back down. She said climbing down was probably worse than climbing up, because she said when I came down I could see the ground below me, and she got a real fright then.
Oh, great. I know why I would forget to ask, because by the time we got back to the ground, I think I would be catatonic. That's the state I'd be in.
Well, then when she got back in into her seat, they went back up they were down at 3,000 feet because you lose height when you're doing aerobatics. And they went back up to 6,000 feet, and then she had to climb out. He gave her the wing waggle again, that dreaded wing waggle, and she hopped out again and climbed across the left wing and lay prone on a javelin, clutching at the front with both hands forward of the leading edge, and wrapped her feet together around the back end. And he did the 6 maneuvers again, and she's not strapped in and she hasn't got a parachute. So figure that one out. But anyway, that was Steph. She did it. She loved it. And it's done now.
The clear signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal. My very special guest this week is writer, photographer, journalist Kathy Mexted, and we're talking about her latest book, Take Flight, the incredible stories of Australian women who reach for the sky. Now, Kathy, of course, there's 10 stories that you've talked about in this book, and unfortunately we're not going to have enough time to talk about all of them, but one person who I think a lot of people may have seen performing at, for example, if you're at the recent Gold Coast Air Show, the Pacific Air Show Gold Coast, and many other places around where there are aerial displays going on, you will see Emma McDonald. And I know Emma is a fixed-wing pilot, which wasn't supposed to be the focus of this book, but I'm really glad you got to include Emma in this book because she's doing some amazing things. She's she's well on her way to becoming one of Australia's foremost aerial display pilots.
Yes, I've known Emma vaguely. I didn't know her that well, but I'd had some conversations with her, and she kindly lent me some footage for the promo video for the previous book for Australian women pilots. And I had to put on the video Emma McDonald in brackets, not in this book. So when I did the second book, I thought, well, it's a good time to include Emma now in case I never get to do a third one. And I think she's so important, especially for women pilots in the aviation scene now, that it was too good an opportunity to pass up. And her type of flying is very unique and certainly deserves a place there. Mm.
It's interesting. You know, one of the things I didn't know about Emma, and I don't know why I assumed this, I didn't think that she had an aviation background family-wise or influences that way, but it actually turns out that she comes from a long line of aviators within her family.
Yeah, she mentioned recently that her grandmother was one of the early Australian women pilots, and the grandmother and grandfather both flew, and then their children, and so Emma's cousins and siblings all fly. So she's very much from an aviation family. I think most of them fly aerial agriculture, crop dusting, which is highly exacting work. But Emma was at an air show and she saw Matt Hall performing, and she said, that's what I want to do. So he was doing his high energy aerobatics. Most people may or may not know that Matt was the Red Bull 2019 World Air Race champion, and he was doing this aerobatic display, and she said to her father, that's what I want to do. When she saw it, that's what I want to do. So when somebody has that that light bulb moment, it was a real moment for her. And so she spoke to him afterwards, and he said, well, here's what you've got to do. And he gave her a list. And actually, Emma's not the only one in the book that got the list. Somebody has given them a list, and then you've got a clear path to where you've got to go. And she just started working through the list, and then the opportunity to work at Matt Hall Racing came up, and she grabbed that opportunity, and she's managed to work her way up from joy flights to doing aeromedical flights. They do Wings for Kids, and Emma loves that. And she also does, of course, still does the aerobatic joy flights. But we all know her for her beautiful displays, aerobatic displays. And she performed at the biggest air show in the world, I think, at Huntington Beach in America.
Yep, that's the Pacific Air Show. It's interesting. I don't actually like this word. I don't know what you think of the word trailblazer, but perhaps she might be said to be that, Kathy, because she also has experience of going in and becoming a diesel mechanic. And I can imagine that would be of course, we all know this is a very male-dominated environment and can be a bit blokey. I imagine that would have been a challenge for her, and I believe, and I know from reading the book, that she actually did it in style.
Yeah, she said on her first day that the foreman singled her out and said, you don't belong here and you're not going to last, you won't make it. And so she responded to that by becoming Apprentice of the Year. And they became good friends.
It's interesting. There's so many roles in aviation that anybody can do. And it's not only flying. I mean, everybody looks at pilots. So, if you're going on a holiday and you're sitting in the front of a Jetstar plane or whatever, everyone thinks of the pilots. But there's a lot of other roles in aviation, a lot of other really interesting careers that make sure those pilots can do what they do. I mean, you think of air traffic controllers, for example, people that are working in flight planning. There's millions of different roles you can do, and anybody can do them.
My daughter said recently that there was, I think, 3 or 4 of her peers at school wanted to do aviation, but it was never presented to them as a viable option. And they were encouraged. Even my husband was told, it's nice that you want to fly planes, but look at engineering or something else. And I think it's because maybe the careers advisors don't see flying they don't understand the industry. And it's as simple as just going to a flying school, taking a flying lesson. You pay the money, you get taught. It's like having driving lessons. It's the same kind of process, isn't it, really?
Only way cooler and considerably more expensive. Anyway, we won't go down that path.
Way more expensive.
Kathy, speaking of careers, you've been in the writing game a long time, and I love the way you write. I don't just say that because you're a friend of mine. I've always liked the way you write. Can you tell me a little bit about the process? You sit down and you think, hey, I'm going to write a book about this. How do you storyboard that out? How does that process work?
With this book, the first thing I did was make a list. Got to have a list. And I knew I needed 10 people, and I probably had a short list of 20. And then I started calling people I knew, saying, this is what I want to do. And that was how I found Heather Swan. Somebody said to me, there's this woman who jumped off a Himalayan mountain in a wingsuit. I don't know if she'll talk to you or not, but you can give it a go. And so I tracked Heather down and she said yes. And I was like, yay. Somebody else told me about Sasha Dench, who was the lady that followed the swans. She was a conservationist and she flew her paramotor from Russia to England following the Buick swans. And that was a 3-month expedition. And I emailed Sasha and she said yes. And so it's a matter of making a list and chatting to people to find out what they're interested in and then picking what you think are the most engaging stories. And it's not necessarily the first person or the best person or the person who jumped from the highest or flew the furthest or whatever. It's actually got to have a narrative arc. So you have stasis, crisis, resolution. And the crisis doesn't have to be a bad crisis. It can just be an exciting event, which in Emma's case was probably, it comes towards the end where she's really doing high performance aerobatics and achieving what she set out to do. For Heather Swan, it was jumping off a 21,000-foot Himalayan mountain. And for Sasha Dench, it was achieving the goal of figuring out where the swans were going. So, I just make a list and then start working through it. And at some point early on, I talk to the publisher and say, you interested in this book? And they say yes or no. And if they say no, well, I stop right there.
I know writing is a process, Kathy, and I've done a little bit of writing myself. I did a fair bit of it last year when I was quite unwell in hospital, and I did that for myself in a way because I wanted to document it to make sure that I never really forgot what this experience was like. But a lot of people told me it was really good, and gee whiz, Steve, you should do some more writing. Do you know what? I've tried to do some more writing since, and I can't put myself in that creative headspace again. I just don't know how to do it.
I think for me, I'm so motivated by the book and by the stories that I'm writing and that I can sit down and I can sit there for 8 hours and just work on that story. Usually I'll start with the heat of the story. So you pick out the best bit and then you go back and tell the backstory and then you go to what the story's about and then you reach a conclusion where you can wrap it all up, a satisfying conclusion.
Maybe it's a matter of starting at the end and working back to the beginning perhaps. I don't know.
Well, I haven't written my own memoir. It's easier to write about somebody else.
Well, I can tell you what, if getting into a headspace for me for writing means having a heart attack, I think I'll pass on a writing career because once in a lifetime is enough for me.
Yeah, I hope I never have to do that.
Well, Kathy, it's a wonderful book. I'm glad we could have a chat about all of that. It's called Take Flight. It's available hopefully in all good bookstores around the country, and I think you can buy it on Amazon as well. And Kathy, you've got a website as well. Where can we find you online?
kathymexted.com.au. So I respond to Facebook and Instagram quite well and all through my website.
Fantastic. Well, continued success and we'll have you on a podcast hopefully very soon as well.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, that wraps up another edition of The Clear Signal. Thanks very much for being with us. Thanks very much, of course, to Kathy for joining us. Again, kathymexted.com.au. That is Mexted. That's how you spell Kathy's name. And thanks also to Kim Berry for joining us with some great information there on the food industry. Check out the magazine there. Very industry focused, but a lot of great information there at foodanddrinkbusiness.com.au. We'll be back in a week's time with more great interviews. Until then, folks, stay safe, have fun, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.
Southern Skies Media.